Wencl, and today we're talking about 10 players that you can look to drop after week 4 to make those waiver wire adds ahead of week 5. We'll talk about some guys in deeper leagues, definitely in some shallow leagues as well. But before we dive on into that list of players, you can take the guesswork out of waiver wire decisions with FantasyPros Waiver Assistant. It will give you instant analysis on potential moves from over 100 fantasy experts. You'll also discover both the weekly and rest of season impact for every waiver ad. All you have to do is visit fantasypros.com/myplaybook or download the Fantasy Football My Playbook app. Again, all you have to do, visit fantasypros.com/myplaybook or download the Fantasy Football My Playbook app to optimize your roster today. Our first cut candidate this week is Cincinnati Bengals wide receiver Andrei Iosivas. Iosivas had a strong start to his sophomore season, finishing as a top 24 wide receiver twice in the first 3 weeks, while drawing 17 total targets. That may have come with the benefit of playing without T. Higgins though, as he only drew 1 target compared to T's 9 against the Panthers on Sunday. Overall, his snap percentage and routes run weren't bad. He played more snaps than T and ran only 2 less routes. But the reality though, is that when Joe Burrow has both Jamar Chase and T. Higgins at his disposal, Iosivas is going to naturally become the third option. When Tyler Boyd was still a Bengal, you knew when you should put him in your lineup versus when he could just sit on your waiver wire. It was always dependent on the availability of Jamar and Higgins. Now that both are healthy, you can find another reliable option on the waiver wire. The second player on our list is Gabe Davis, wide receiver for the Jacksonville Jaguars. The Jaguars kept it close with the Texans on Sunday, but Gabe Davis didn't get to join in on much of the fun. His 5 targets on the afternoon were third in the pecking order behind Christian Kirk and Brian Thomas Jr., despite running just as many routes and playing just as many snaps. This Jaguars offense has made it clear they want to continue taking deep shots and pushing the ball downfield. Lawrence is currently third in deep ball attempts. However, it hasn't been clicking with Gabe Davis, who's finished outside of the top 80 wide receivers in each of the last 2 weeks. Going forward, it's going to be too unpredictable when you can or can't play Gabe Davis, so instead of being stuck with that headache yourself, you can let someone else decide if they want it on the waiver wire. The next player you can look to drop this week is Demarcus Robinson, wide receiver for the Los Angeles Rams. At this point, it's a complete game of roulette with the Rams wide receivers as to who's going to have the most fantasy relevant day. In week 4, it was Jordan Whittington and Tutu Atwell who each put up 12.2 fantasy points and led the team in both snaps and routes run. Demarcus Robinson became the third option on Sunday, catching 2 of his 3 targets for 37 yards. This game also marked the third time this year that Robinson had finished outside of the top 50 wide receivers in PPR formats, and each week, we get closer and closer to the return of first, Cooper Kupp, but eventually Puka Nacua as well. There's a chance Kupp is back after the team's week 6 bye, so not only is time ticking for Demarcus Robinson on your fantasy team, but it may have already run out considering he hasn't put up a startable performance yet. Another wide receiver you can send to the waiver wire is Brandin Cooks of the Dallas Cowboys. Cooks has had ample opportunity to be a fantasy contributor over the last 3 weeks, and especially in weeks 2 and 3 when the Cowboys were playing catch-up through the air. To say the least, he's failed to capitalize on those opportunities, finishing as the wide receiver 80, the wide receiver 90, and the wide receiver 70 each of the last 3 weeks. With Jake Ferguson back in the lineup, it's clear that CD and Ferguson are Dak's preferred targets, leaving the wide receiver 3 role in this offense as a pure toss-up between Brandin Cooks and Jalen Tolbert right now, who's outproduced Cooks on the season and is currently a top 50 wide receiver in PPR formats. Unless you are the most desperate fantasy football team right now, you're probably not looking to start Brandin Cooks anytime soon, so you can feel free to drop him for a player who will give you anything more than 5 fantasy points. Our first non-wide receiver cut candidate this week is Hunter Henry, tight end for the New England Patriots. Similar to the Rams, it's going to be a game of roulette each week as to which Patriots pass catcher will be featured, except this is a game I will have little interest in playing as long as Jacoby Brissett is the quarterback. We are now 2 weeks removed from Hunter Henry's tight end 3 finish against the Seahawks, and since then, he's finished as the tight end 43 and the tight end 34 in a year where tight ends have absolutely stunk. Henry is still on the field plenty, finishing second of all Patriots and pass catchers in snaps and routes run on Sunday. However, this offense is nowhere near reliable enough to depend on Hunter Henry as a weekly option. If he's currently sitting on your roster as your backup tight end, I frankly believe it's a waste of a roster spot. If you're streaming tight ends, you can funnel them week to week without much consequence for dropping them. We don't need to chase week 2 anymore. It's okay to move on and send Hunter Henry to the waiver wire. Making this list for the second week in a row, you can look to dump Los Angeles Chargers running back Gus Edwards. For the second week now, Gus was relegated to give J.K. Dobbins a breather role, as Dobbins played 40 of 56 snaps compared to Gus's 14. All Gus was able to scrap from those 14 snaps was 6 carries compared to Dobbins, who was given 20 total opportunities on the afternoon. Not to pile on the guy, but Gus has yet to average more than 3.3 yards per carry in a game this year, and has now finished outside of the top 50 running backs in back-to-back weeks. At this point, Gus is just a handcuff to J.K. Dobbins, which might be somewhat valuable in a deeper league, but in almost any other league format, Gus can be safely dropped. Unless you're in a 2-quarterback league or a superflex league, Matthew Stafford of the Los Angeles Rams can be dropped ahead of week 5. To no surprise, when you don't have star-level wide receivers to throw the football to, you're probably not going to be fantasy relevant. After finishing as the quarterback 12 in week 1, Stafford has finished as the quarterback 31, quarterback 22, and quarterback 27 the following 3 weeks. He's only thrown 2 touchdowns this year, which has been absolutely killing his weekly value. But as we've seen, why force Stafford to use career wide receiver 3s as his wide receiver 1 when you can just feed Kyren Williams? Stafford is an immensely difficult play until he gets Kupp and Nakua back, and if he's your backup quarterback in a single quarterback league, you can absolutely drop him. Another running back making this list for the second straight week is Ezekiel Elliott of the Dallas Cowboys. Unfortunately, I think it's over for Zeke. Sure, he was given 5 carries against the Giants, but 3 of those came in the fourth quarter when Dallas was attempting to ice the game. He only played 10 of 56 snaps on Thursday Night Football, and was outsnapped by fullback Hunter Luepke, who was taken over as the third down option for this team. Optimism is non-existent for the seasoned vet at this point. He has finished as the running back 45 or worse in each of the last 3 weeks, and gets 2 really tough matchups against the Steelers and Lions before their week 7 bye. Zeke is still rostered in 52% of Yahoo leagues and 70% of ESPN leagues, which is way too high, and I fully expect that percentage to plummet before week 5. Dipping back into the wide receivers, our next cut candidate is Green Bay Packers wide receiver Christian Watson. Ian Rappaport tweeted Monday morning that Christian Watson avoided fracturing his ankle, but he did suffer a high ankle sprain, which could unfortunately land him on IR. Now, if you have an IR spot open on your roster, you could stash Watson, but what if you don't? What if you already have Puka Nakua or Christian McCaffrey slotted there? There's a real chance we may not see Christian Watson until week 11. Landing on the IR would guarantee Watson is out 4 games, making his soonest possible return in week 9. However, the Packers have a week 10 bye and could certainly give Watson the extra rest to come back 100% in week 11. If you're in a deeper league and can afford to keep Watson stashed, that's completely fine, but in shallow leagues, unless you have an open IR spot, you can drop Watson knowing he'll likely be out for a key stretch of the fantasy football season. Our last cut candidate this week is Las Vegas Raiders running back Zamir White. Zamir almost made this list last week, but Antonio Pierce's comments of getting him 20 plus touches kept ringing through my head. Well, he almost got there in week 4. White was given 17 carries, but only came away with 3 fantasy points on the afternoon after he totaled only 50 yards on the ground and lost a fumble on top of it. The Raiders simply can't run the football this year. Through 4 weeks, they are averaging only 3.6 yards per carry, which is the 4th worst mark in the league. That checks out because Zamir White has yet to average more than 3.4 yards per carry in a game this year. The Raiders also rank second to last in rushing yards per game, and that's just not a backfield I want to navigate in fantasy football. There was hope for Zamir White to have a breakout season, but we can put that to rest at this point and say goodbye in shallow leagues. Alrighty, y'all, that's it. That's all I've got for you today, but before we sign off, remember, you can take the guesswork out of waiver wire decisions with FantasyPros Waiver Assistant. It will give you instant analysis on potential moves from over 100 fantasy experts. You'll also discover both the weekly and rest of season impact for every waiver ad. All you have to do is visit fantasypros.com/myplaybook or download the Fantasy Football My Playbook app. Again, all you have to do, visit fantasypros.com/myplaybook or download the Fantasy Football My Playbook app to optimize your roster today.